Hi, it's me, Brodie McLeod, again, on the old vlog. Just doing a bit of vlogging, mate. Just doing a bit of vlogging. I've almost reached sort of 25 views on some of my videos. It's really inspiring. And yeah, I'm going to discuss some themes that are quite complex today, and of a kind of adult nature. So just to make you aware of that, if you're not up for kind of entertainment and light-hearted banter, then this might not be the video for you. But broadly, if you possess a conscience or a heart or any sense of kind of nationalistic pride or sort of engagement in community and respect for the safety and sanctity of human safety and life and egalitarian, free, open, democratic and peaceful society where our families can grow and live in harmonious synchronicity with each other, then you might want to continue watching, even though it's me saying it, and even though you have to listen to me talk for some of the video at least. It might be something that you, let's get this thing out of the way, that you find a prominent issue, something that concerns you. So I've always wondered, like, okay, so how is it that they got people who like monitor terrorism, right? And they're really fucking shit hot at their job, and like no terrorist attacks ever seem to happen in like London, not very often anymore, and that's because SIS and GCHQ do a shit hot job of keeping us all safe. Respect to them, they really do. I think you don't know what a D notice is. If you don't know what a D notice is, Google it when you finish this video. Defence and Media Advisory, something. There are some things like, when they catch people who try to do things that are going to be really scary for people, they put a D notice on it because they don't want people to find out about it and be worried. But by all accounts, if people knew what the intelligence services do to protect us, they wouldn't be able to sleep at night. I actually slept all through the night last night for the first time in ages, so I'm very, 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 very grateful for that. I used to want to work for the intelligence agencies, talented intelligence service. Like, there was a guy, one of my best mates, well, when I was growing up, we used to play N64 together, GoldenEye, mostly, ironically. His name was Daniel Houghton, and he lived in Buckfastleigh, and we were both in like top sets for some classes at South Dartmoor Community College while I was still at State School before I went to SANS, which is a privately run democratic school. And he was really bright, and he went and worked for SIS, and he got caught, by all accounts, with like a few million quid in cash in bags, trying to sell state secrets to somebody. And I just thought, what a piece of shit. Like, when I saw it in the paper in 2011, I was like, how could anybody do that? Do you know what I mean? Just like, it's like just such a betrayal of like trust, and you're working to protect a country, not to put it to detriment. I've been concerned for quite a while with institutional child sex trafficking and abuse, and I've read all David Icke books, right? I've read about 10 of his books, and if you read his books, he claims that child abuse is used as a blackmail and a way of securing people's silence. Says that it goes on all the time, and much more than people realise. He claims they use hypnosis. I don't know if I buy that. And that, he also says it's ritualistic and done by lizards. So you've got to appreciate that David Icke is a counterintelligence agent, right? So what counterintelligence in essence is putting some bullshit with some truth, and then using the source and the citation to delegitimize the truth, which is inconvenient. And there wasn't a reference to alcohol there, the truth being something which, if someone says, I heard that the Department of Health and Social Care and social workers take kids off their parents and put them into bent sort of orphanages and, you know, foster parents who they know already are sort of unwell and deranged people who have ulterior motives, and like, you know, this kind of network. I'm not talking about a, you know, ethnic minority here, you know, or anything to do with the Rotherham situation or the kind of child abuse scandals that you know, our people are banging on about in terms of any ethnicity. I'm actually talking about state sponsored child abuse or institutional child abuse. How is it, right? If they watch everything on the internet and they know what everybody's doing, they can listen to every phone call. Apparently they got radar. Yeah, you could use two cups and a bit of string, and you could be speaking to your mate on one of those. They got radar so powerful that they can hear what was being said. It doesn't matter if you're using fucking WhatsApp, you know, or anything, like anything you say on a telephone or anything you say to somebody in a room, unless you're in a fucking lead-lined bunker like 50 feet underground, there is nowhere that they can't hear what's being said between people. You know, they have security capabilities which are far beyond what civilians understand or know, apparently. So I've heard. I've heard of rumours that there are people who kind of, I mean, Jimmy Savile. I mean, like, you know, this isn't a kind of an, you know, affectatious illusion, and there's no offence intended. I'm not like, you know, I don't know. I think Jimmy Savile might have been like a case of like groupies in his room who are of questionable age, you know, who wanted to come backstage after a BBC show, sit on his knee, and, you know, he sort of copped a feel. It's very different from like, you know, children that are like under 10 years old, you know, like some of the cases that I've made videos about and got Gemini to talk about have been like really make you be sick in your mouth kind of shit, you know what I mean? Like it's really properly gross and terrifying. Not as terrifying as like getting blown up, probably, you know, but different, but, and well, one would argue maybe more important, you know, is it more important to regulate terrorism than child sex trafficking? I mean, in the most immediate sense, yes, because if somebody wants to, I guess, you know, attack a city, then there's loads of people of all ages there and they're all vulnerable, and that might make kind of national security obviously more important than using just one demographic. Like if it was only older people, you know, there's probably, I don't know that there is a big trade or industry in geriatric porn or kind of like old, you know, old people being abused. They do get abused in care homes, you know what I mean? It's fucking horrible. Like some of the stuff you see, hidden camera stuff, but, you know, it doesn't really necessarily correlate to, you know, if you just targeted that demographic over national security, that would seem, you know, as much as I love little old ladies and little old men, great, you know, for drinking tea and telling you stories. I haven't got a grandma or a grandpa myself. They've all passed away, I think. Well, I've got a Spanish grandpa I've never met. Apparently he's from Andalusia. And his name's Faley Avendano was his name. Never met him. Apparently he was a bit of a wide boy and he didn't treat my grandma or her two daughters, my auntie and my mum, very well. And so they came to the UK as immigrants years ago in like the 50s or 60s or something like that. Fuck knows, I don't really know the story. My mum's dead and my auntie and I don't speak, so yeah. I digress. What I'm saying, I guess, is if you term one of them state-sponsored institutional child abuse, and then you look at the other one as terrorism, right? You've got a sort of a bit of a balancing act where it's not that one's necessarily more difficult. That's what I'm talking about. Not what's more important, what's more difficult to catch. How is it? Like if I started writing on WhatsApp about doing something really awful, or speaking to somebody probably about, doing something really awful, which I haven't got an intention of doing, just to be clear, in a terrorist context, that gets picked up. But like, there seems to be, like, according to David Icke, if someone says, "Where did you hear that? Did you hear it in a David Icke book?" Oh yeah, the same one that thinks the Queen came from a hatchery under Balmoral Castle. It's like, the society. It's the same with all the alternative media. Basically, all of them work for the security services and are disinformation agents. That's why they're all kind of like. There was a guy who used to work at MI5, David Shaler, who was involved in the Truth movement, and without disrespect to anybody in the LGBTQ plus community, he started to say he was the son of God and would once a week dress up in feminine dress, which he's got every right to do. But he isn't like transgender or transsexual or even homosexual. I don't think. He just used to kind of ham it up and dress as a woman. Annie Machon was involved in the kind of truth movement. She's made some really bold statements about state-sponsored terrorism, false flag terrorism. She's quite credible actually, and I don't know how she got involved within the truth movement. I don't think they're all kind of in a way. I don't know. It's like I watched this thing the other day. There was a dude that was talking about ULEZ cameras and conflating that with the COVID vaccine, and he like got like a 5p, like put it on his arm, and it was like, see, it magnetizes onto your arm. The fucking ULEZ cameras, mate. ULEZ cameras are activating the nanobots in your DNA. And I was like, no, mate, I just don't, I've got an open mind. Truth is stranger than fiction sometimes, and you've got to be open-minded if you really want to know what's going on. I've had my lived experience. I've seen and heard some incredibly dark things that go right to the top of British society, and I've struggled with NHS, I've struggled with banks, I've struggled with the police force, and it's not that one's less important than the other. National security, I think, is more important than as gross and unfair as it sounds, than the individual needs of a sort of a minority demographic of people, whether they be minors, middle-aged people or old people. Everybody is affected by terrorism, and only some people are affected by certain crimes. But they're both just as easy to combat and tackle, aren't they? Surely shouldn't be loads of nonsense, available for, like, it's these people that go catching them, the predator paedophile hunters, like, they catch them out and they film them, they just take a camera in their face and say, what are you doing? Like, there's plenty of these guys to root out, do you know what I mean? And they're online. I suppose all they've got is access to, a messenger service. I don't know that they're necessarily kind of got an a la carte dark web menu of, kind of children to choose from. And I don't know how much the Department of Health and Social Care is involved. That people in the truth community are very, there's lots of horror stories about people who don't have access to, their younger members of their family because they smoked a bit of crack, or because they, have a drug addiction, or like they've got an abusive partner. And like, this was when we were young. Like, my mum used to take me to Ipplepen Primary School. I remember very specifically Miss Allen. In year 5, my teacher was called Miss Allen. At Ipplepen Primary School, I went to school with Michael Seven, who had Chloe Seven and Emily Seven, also at the same school. And I went to school with Timmy Mann. Don't know whatever happened to him. He was in year 5 with me. And Paul Jackson, he's somewhere in the South Hams. I think he's a chef. He used to be my best mate. Yeah, I mean, all I'm kind of getting at, I guess, is that one of them's more kind of important than the other. And I think I would, answer my own question, but I don't think that they're more difficult to tackle. I don't know that, if they wanted to catch all the kind of people, it wouldn't necessarily be that difficult. You know, like, I'm sure the dark web is monitored. Like, people think that like everyone thought, you know, EncroChat was safe, you know, and it wasn't. And like, WhatsApp's put this advertising campaign out recently. Nobody can read our messages, right? Nobody, not even us. But I reckon that's bollocks. I reckon that's not true. I reckon that if you started to use WhatsApp and it was something that was vitally important, you would find you face consequences with immediacy and you'd be apprehended very quickly. And that, I think, you know, it's not that I don't think there's anything, I think there's anything wrong with that in terms of civil liberties and privacy point of view. I do think that from the point of view of what's functional and possible in terms of, you know, protecting our young people, which, you know, is something which I feel very passionate about. It's might be less important, and there might be less resources allocated to child sex trafficking, you know, potentially even, you know, people who could even end up with a child losing their life. I don't know. Their children go missing. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't really bear thinking about. But I'm just saying, you know, it might be more important to combat radical Islam and Christian fundamentalists and mental people who want to, you know, kind of damage or, you know, harm the state or public infrastructure. But they should just be able to catch them both. Like, do you know what I mean? They shouldn't have to be kind of there. Why is there a disparity? And there's a disparity, like I said in the prompt, in the namesake. You know, if you're talking about institutional child sex trafficking, institutional, you know, it's that, you know, institutional child sex trafficking is, by definition, demonstrably, by its name, something which might involve the public sector. You know, the public sector or the police. You know, if you read David Icke's books, he reckons that they're all under the thumb. You know, he reckons they hypnotise young people and then they take powerful people, like, you know, people in different positions of power, and they'll like film them and then use it as a kind of bargaining tool to secure their silence. You know, you can give somebody 500 million quid, and if they're doing something awful, they might still have a fit of conscience and tell somebody. But you frame them as being a nonce, then, you know, they, you know, even the thought of getting a bullet in the head doesn't bear thinking about in comparison to being remembered as somebody who has no dignity, no honour, and also going into sort of incarceration under the pretext that you're, you know, lots of people say they've been framed. I think a lot of people do get framed. I've heard of like parole, like the parole system being quite corrupt. Like, people get told they can, you know, they have to go to their parole meetings and like, I don't know, it's like a sort of like a slavery thing, you know, which the police have with people who have to do as they're told, you know, otherwise they get thrown back in jail. And it's just like, there's a lot of corruption. I made a previous video, you know, in 2024 or 23, 24, you know, year end, whatever, 42% of all online crime was from serving police officers. Check it out. It's on Novar Media, Novar. They're really good, actually. And they did an article with this crazy statistic they found. And yeah, it's just really, you know, I'm not saying police are nonsense. I'm not saying that, you know, the security services are per se. David Icke he says that a lot, and like, I don't necessarily believe him, but what if he's right about it? You know, what if that's the grain of truth in with his, you know, shape-shifting, teleporting kind of biped lizards story? Like, what if that bit about the public sector and, you know, British society being woven together by a conspiracy of silence, and hypnosis as well. I reckon I've been hypnotised and abused in my life over the years. I won't talk about that because it's not really appropriate for YouTube. But I don't know, like it's so dark and so horrible, which is why I said at the beginning of the video you might not want to watch it. But I'm going to have a look at Gemini now. I asked, why is terrorism and online terrorist activity so much easier to combat and detect than online child abuse networks and child sex trafficking in the UK? Is it just that there is more of one than another, or that there's an apportionable inequality of budget assigned to security organisations that concern themselves with national security in comparison with child sex trafficking? Could it be plausible that child abuse networks may be institutional, incriminating the public sector and security services themselves, whilst terrorism poses more of a threat? Both are serious crimes, but terrorism seems, given the impression of the media, to be frequently apprehended, and neutralised in the UK. However, and I guess in a way demonstrably due to its namesake, institutional sex trafficking and abuse somehow slips through the net, remains an endemic, harrowing and prolific problem in British society. Could it be that the police and security services are at best complicit by virtue of negligence or disproportionate prioritisation, or at worst directly involved with networks which traffic and abuse children? Surely the technology, resources and impetus exists to tackle both. So how is it there's an inequality in successful apprehension of these two crimes? I'll read it myself today. Maybe I'll use a bit of Gemini to read it. I don't know. I'll reread it. I'll read it. The perception that terrorism is more easily combated and detected than abuse networks in the UK is a complex issue with multiple contributing factors. While both are serious crimes, the nature of the offences and the way they're addressed by law enforcement and security services differ significantly. Differences in the nature of the crimes. Terrorism and its networks often operate with a visible public-facing component. Terrorist organisations, even online, often seek to spread propaganda, recruit members and communicate their ideology publicly or semi-publicly. Their goal is to influence and intimidate a wider population, which means their online presence is often designed to be discovered by a target audience. This creates a more detectable trail for security services like MI5 and counter-terrorism policing. They can monitor public forums, social media and other platforms for extremist content and symbols, which are often shared with the intent of reaching and radicalising others. The online activities these groups are often linked to a more organised hierarchical structure. Child abuse networks, on the other hand, are fundamentally clandestine and aim for complete secrecy. The perpetrators seek to operate in hidden, encrypted spaces specifically to avoid detection. They don't want to recruit a large public following. They want to find vulnerable children and other abusers without being seen. The content and communications kept in the darkest corners of the internet, wherever that is, making it much harder to penetrate these networks. The victims are often isolated and silenced, making it incredibly difficult for them to come forward or for authorities to identify them. Perpetrators may also operate individually or in small decentralised groups, which makes them harder to track than a larger, more structured terrorist organisation. It's a very good argument, but it doesn't necessarily imply or implicitly state or have a stance on whether or not it's plausible that it's institutional. Maybe it will get onto that. To go on, funding, prioritisation and institutional structures. The UK government has historically given a high level of priority and funding to counter terrorism. Following a number of high-profile attacks, there's been a substantial increase in resources for counter-terrorism policing and intelligence services. This includes a significant boost in funding for counter-terrorism policing and MI5 and the establishment of specialised units. The government's strategy and funding commitments are often made publicly in response to perceived and actual threats. While child sex abuse has been designated a strategic policing priority, giving it the same significance as terrorism, serious organised crime, the allocation of resources and structure of the response have been criticised. Some sources suggest that a more unified and nationally coordinated response has been lacking and that while there are new initiatives and centres being established, the overall effort may not be as centrally and robustly funded as counter-terrorism. The independent inquiry into child sex abuse and other reports have highlighted a lack of understanding, failure to share information effectively among agencies, limiting the effectiveness of their response. I mean, if it's, it's a bit like the Independent Police Complaints Commission, they investigate themselves and find themselves, they always call them independent inquiries. The Chilcot inquiry, I think, was an independent inquiry, wasn't it? The independent inquiry into 9/11, I've heard a lot about from the truth community. Institutional complicity and failure. The suggestion of institutional complicity or negligence is a serious and well-documented concern in the UK. The independent inquiry into child sex abuse examined historical failures by institutions, including local authorities, police forces, and faith-based organisations to protect children from abuse. The inquiry revealed that in many cases abuse was covered up or not properly investigated due to institutional failures, misplaced concerns about community relations, or a reluctance to believe victims. These findings demonstrate that institutional failings have been a significant factor in allowing child abuse networks to operate with impunity. They always seem to kind of have this, it's a bit like when I have chats with my brother and I say that I'm facing corruption or crime, do you know what I mean? Like, people are trying to fucking fuck me, like, figuratively. He always says they're just underfunded. They're just not doing their job properly. They're having it's a failure. Do you know what I mean? It's room for improvement. It's like, they're using this vernacular. They often use this. I think this inquiry sort of found that things could have been done better. It does say covering it up. Was covered up. And I think that bit's probably the most true sort of selection of words in that paragraph. Is that it's covered up. Because I think it is kept secret. Like, terrorists keep their shit secret as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, they use encrypted networks, and they don't want to get caught either. And they're just as well funded and well resourced and dangerous, but just to all of us rather than just to some of us. But without digressing, I think I'd be interested to know more about the ICSA. Maybe I'll research that and do another video on it or something. But institutional failings have been a significant factor in allowing child abuse networks to operate with impunity. Failures and complicity are a different thing. Do you know what I mean? Failure, if you're trying to do something, sort of like, me failing to stop eating meat by going in and accidentally on purpose buying a Big Mac, having a bite out of it, and then claiming that I failed to, I did my best, but I failed, isn't, do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, if it's like literally at the fucking coalface of the British elite, and everybody's getting blackmailed and, they're using it to secure people's silence. I think that's, it's a fucking dangerous thing for me to be talking about. I mean, I'm probably going to get assassinated anyway, but which is really terrifying, actually. But I'm not, about to level accusations that I know nothing about. So please don't concern yourself with that. But, I have had, my suspicions, and I just think that some of what David Icke's written is true, and this, these let's investigate ourselves kind of campaigns don't, work always. Obs, I think. No, I thought there was somebody knocking at my door, but they weren't. Right, so the idea that security services themselves could be directly involved is a grave accusation. While there have been cases of individual officers being prosecuted for child sex abuse offences, the notion of systemic direct involvement by the security services in child sex trafficking networks would be a major scandal, and is not something for which there's a publicly available verified evidence. The institutional failings, as highlighted by the IICSA, are more often characterised as a result of negligence, lack of prioritisation, a culture of covering up abuse, rather than direct complicity in the networks. They're not going to say, they were running the child sex trafficking networks and using it to secure people's silence. Like, people get really affected. One thing that I've found is people get really offended when they're wrongfully accused of it, and they people who are, it's a bit like the sub postmaster thing. People who do it, if it's true, it must be horrible, because it's just they haven't done it. They've got families, they've got kids themselves, they haven't done anything wrong to any other children, but it's so easy for them to, not easy, but plausible in a sense that it wouldn't be logistically difficult, I don't think, for this kind of insidious cancer to profligate, and spread throughout the UK. And I'm not the superhero that's gonna necessarily stop that, but I'm making a video about it anyway. Inequality in successful apprehension. The inequality in successful apprehension rates between these two crimes can be attributed to the factors outlined above. Nature of the crime. The secretive and decentralised nature of child abuse networks makes them inherently harder to detect, penetrate than terrorist groups, which often have a public-facing element. If you see any public-facing terrorists, let me know. Victim and witness testimony. Child sexual abuse cases often rely heavily on the victim's testimony. A high number of prosecutions fail because victims are reluctant to testify, withdraw their support for the prosecution, or get intimidated. This is a significant challenge in bringing perpetrators to justice. And of course, evidence. While online child abuse material is a key piece of evidence, tracing it back to the perpetrator and proving guilt can be a complex and time-consuming process, especially with the use of encrypted platforms and sophisticated methods to hide identity. Institutional failings. Historical and, in some cases, ongoing institutional failures have meant that opportunities to apprehend abusers have been missed and victims have been let down. In conclusion, while both terrorism and child abuse are high priority crimes, the fundamental differences in their nature, the challenges in gathering evidence and securing victim testimony, and the historical issues of institutional failure and in addressing child abuse have contributed to the perception that one is more easily combated than the other. I want to make it clear that I don't know what I'm talking about. So don't listen to me, with anything other than an open mind, because I haven't ever seen any child abuse. I think I might have heard some child abuse once or twice. And I've got a very strong suspicion that in an institutional way around me growing up in my life, it's taken place. But I don't know that, my difference between believing something and suspecting it, and it does just seem a bit of a disparity to me, that to me it just sort of seems like you've got terrorism on the one hand, institutional child sex trafficking on the other. So they're both on the internet, they're both using the same dark web platforms. Surely we've got AI that's 30 years more advanced than the stuff that I use on my phone at the moment, and security and surveillance technology which is far more advanced than anything any civilian knows about. Why are they not just busting them all? And it is because, demonstrably it's in the name, it's in the description, it's like it's institutional child abuse. And that inquiry, that sort of erred on the side of could have done better, didn't say guilty. They were fucking guilty of doing this to, this vulnerable demographic. It said that they were, kind of a bit iffy. Some people were a bit iffy and they could have done better. And I suppose we'll use the word cover up, but not with veracity. And, there wasn't ever an expose as big as the one that not just David Icke, but other people kind of write into There's a, what's that one? What's it called? Trance States of America or something. Kathy O'Brien. There's this woman in America that claims that she was a mind-controlled slave and she was taken to loads of like sexual rituals in the American government buildings, like the Skull and Bones Club or whatever, and she had complete amnesia for years, and then she was deprogrammed or something. I can't remember. I've heard about the book. There's a woman who claims she can like tell you that Bill Clinton's got a birthmark on his, on his chest and exactly where it is, and this, like, apparently her information. The book doesn't look very good. It doesn't look very credible, I must say. I think it's probably bumwash. I don't think if it was true, it ever would have got published, and she wouldn't be on the internet, Maybe, but sometimes it's because people are a credibility vacuum. Like, David Icke is a credibility vacuum, but a bit like me. Like, I've been sectioned 9 times. If I try and tell you that I've won the lottery twice and, I had a princess as a girlfriend in my who's going to be the Queen of England as in my teenage years, and, COVID was all a cover up, that's just, it sounds like delusional bullshit, without disrespect to the 7 million people who lost their lives with COVID. A lot of people have conspiracy theories, about that, and they use the word conspiracy theory to describe it too. And as soon as you say that, people switch off. Like, the woke community is like, they think they know what's going on, but they're being led by sort of Pied Pipers who are just, they take them down the path of, intrigue and intel, scandal, but they stop just where it starts to get interesting. They make sure that everybody, you must have heard about all this stuff, this fucking corrupt government, the military industrial complex, and fucking pharmaceuticals and Monsanto, they've poisoned our food, the fucking chemtrails, fucking, there's nonsense everywhere, don't, wait, did he just say something about Tony Blair? What did he say about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? Oh shit. Don't make sure, they're like moderators. Who was that guy? There was a guy who was an undercover police officer, and he used to have an article. He used to he used to write for The Guardian. I can't remember his name. He's got a bit of a boss eye like me. Like, he's, and by all accounts, quite a nice bloke, but he infiltrated like a environmental campaign group that were doing dodgy shit. And you know what? It's like, I think, I used to go to a lot of protests, and, I campaigned for change, and, I think I've probably been pretty naive for most of my life, thinking that was ever going to work. But I do think that this guy had like children with one of the activists that he was investigating, and there was this horrible story. I think, if I can remember correctly, they were going to break into an environment, like an animal testing facility or some facility, to do a protest and some kind of direct action. And they were going to break through the fence at this one certain place, and he fed this information back to his superiors and to his handler, and had another guy who was like messaging me. This guy I met in a mental institution started talking about his handler. Anyway, this guy got his head kicked in really badly. I think his name was like Kennedy or something, like Mark Kennedy. And it was horrible for him, because all these hippies that he'd been infiltrating and that one of them he'd fallen in love with and father children with, were all like nursing him back to good health, while he was, working to kind of, prevent and censor them. But it's just in case, if like a bunch of animal rights campaigners say, right, we're going to go and shoot everybody at the L'Oreal factory. Do you know what I mean? Like, Ricky Gervais has got an animal rights, animal testing, campaign that he does. And I think it's, absolutely applaudable. And I think it's brilliant that, he's not too, egocentric or, kind of self-absorbed to look at a cause and go with a cause that doesn't get much press. Or, the animal rights campaigners, there ain't very many of them. They're not like Palestine. There ain't a million people there. There's only a few, and they don't get listened to. And, they give out their humble literature and they stand there with their little signs. But, beagles and, doggies are so, everyone loves their dog, you know what I mean? And like it is, animal testing is horrible. It's barbaric, you know. But you know, if they're going to go and do something equally barbaric, even to animal testing scientists, you know, to sort of invoke the idea that, you know, some people will get like radicalized. What I'd like to do is show you a video about extremism, and this is a 40-minute video already. Let's see if we can find it on Google. Extremism. Right. I'll just leave you with this, because this is a great piece by John Cleese about the advantages of extremism. If we can watch it.
Seriously though, we've heard a lot about extremism recently. A nastier, harsher atmosphere everywhere, more abuse and bother boy behaviour, less friendliness and tolerance and respect for opponents. All right, but what we never hear about extremism is its advantages. Well, the biggest advantage of extremism is that it makes you feel good, because it provides you with enemies. Let me explain. The great thing about having enemies is that you can pretend that all the badness in the whole world is in your enemies, and all the goodness in the whole world is in you. Attractive, isn't it? So, if you have a lot of anger and resentment in you anyway, and you therefore enjoy abusing people, then you can pretend that you're only doing it because these enemies of yours are such very bad persons. And that if it wasn't for them, you'd actually be good-natured and courteous and rational all the time. So, if you want to feel good, become an extremist. Okay, now you have a choice. If you join the hard left, they'll give you their list of authorized enemies. Almost all kinds of authority, especially the police, the city, Americans, judges, multinational corporations, public schools, furriers, newspaper owners, fox hunters, generals, castrators, and, of course, moderates. Or, if you'd rather be an extremist on the hard right, no problem, fine, you still get a lovely list of enemies, only they're different ones. Noisy minority groups, unions, Russia, weirdos, demonstrators, welfare sponges, meddlesome clergy, peaceniks, the BBC, strikers, social workers, communists, and, of course, moderates. And upstart actors. Now, once you're armed with one of these super lists of enemies, you can be as nasty as you like and yet feel your behaviours morally justified. So you can strut around abusing people and telling them you could eat them for breakfast and still think of yourself as a champion of the truth, a fighter for the greater good, and not the rather sad paranoid schizoid that you really are.
So that's a really good video. I am going to make no secret of the fact that...
Are you rotting inside your house right now? You're just on the couch or in bed, just scrolling on your phone, unable to remember joy or find the inspiration to participate in life. If that's happening to you, try this thought experiment with me. Imagine time suddenly speeding up. Shoop, the sun goes down, comes back up, it's suddenly tomorrow. Then it's the next day, then next week, then next month. The earth is...
Right, I don't know what the fucking happened there. The audio feed from something just started playing, but I've had to just wait for a few minutes for it to stop. My mind just went blank. My brain, I've got a mental illness, and when I started talking about primary school, I never finished the story. I used to be late all the time. We used to live in a place called Woodland in Denbury in South Devon, and we used to have to drive. My mum, as a single parent in a little blue Fiesta, used to drive me and my child brother, who was like 3 years old at the time. Well, I was 8 when he was born, so by the time, he was very young, and she was late a lot of the time. Like, she was a struggling mum and she was late, and it got to the stage where she was terrified that one of the teachers, like, we got a social worker assigned to us, home help, a woman called Eve from Devon County Council, used to come around and kind of support my mum, but also sort of keep tabs on like how clean the house was. And like, my mum Alethea was really terrified that she was going to lose custody, you know. And a lot of people, you hear horror stories in custody battles, you know, about like the way that social services operate, and my experience with social workers and the Department of Health and Social Care hasn't always been great, and my suspicions are not going to manifest as accusations for a nanosecond, but I have noticed that there seems to be a palpable exoneration of desire to listen to what might be my delusions, but might not be, about things that they could and should be looking to try and apprehend and prevent, but maybe because they're not happening, that's why they're not involved. Maybe it's because they don't want to get involved because it's too dangerous. This video I've made today is pretty dangerous. Like, I'm not accusing the police of being involved in abusing kids necessarily, and I'm not suggesting that I guess I'm not suggesting that I know anything. I don't know anything really. I've never kind of witnessed child abuse exactly. When my brother was little, we lived that same place, Woodland, and when we lived in Ashburton, when he was like 3 or 4, he started having this fixation of an imaginary friend. My mum had a lot of male friends that she used to spend time with. Most of her friends were blokes, and they just used to smoke a bit of puff and eat food together and live in sort of South Devon, like a lot of people do in South Devon. And we were with babysitters a lot of the time. My mum used to go out, she used to sell a bit of weed, and she used to go out smoking and socialising. She never really a big drinker, but and we spent a lot of time with babysitters. And when my brother was with the babysitters on his own, he kept on saying to my mum and to me, "Where's that girl? And I want to see that girl. And Leilani, he said, and he was very specific, like Leilani. Like we thought he'd been watching Teletubbies, like Lala, offered, but he was like, Leilani, I want to see that girl. And my mum was like, he's really, he's only young, but he's got a really confident sense of identity. He knows that guy's name's John and that guy's name's, whatever, and he doesn't imagine people that aren't there. Do you know what I mean? And he almost got referred to CAMS, which is Child Acute Mental Health Services. And we had sort of social services interacting with us throughout my childhood. I actually went to CAMS. I used to go on a group every Tuesday at the Atrium in Torbay Hospital when I was between the age of about 8 and 12. And they were really helpful. We used to sit and talk. We used to all sit in a circle. They used to have lots of nice biscuits and tea and cake and games and resources that really made me feel relieved from the kind of broken home that I was. My mum was a great mum, but she was, she struggled as a single parent, and she was terrified of having social services get involved, But yeah, my brother he just kept on saying he was really fond of this. And my mum was like, it turned into this imaginary friend syndrome, And I don't know, if I'm not accusing anybody who's might have known my mum, of facilitating anything, everyone, because that's very offensive. But if you ask any of them if they remember my little brother having an imaginary friend, I'm sure they'd tell you that that's true. Ask Josh Hurley. He used to be one of my best friends, and when we lived at Bookshelf Flat, there's a bookshop in Ashburton. Used to be a bookshop in Ashburton on the High Street, and we lived above it in a flat called Bookshelf Flat. And my brother was still after this Leilani. Sorry, that was the obs knocking on my door. I had to pause it. He was, ask him, he is a good bloke, I reckon. He's one of my best mates for ages. I'm not in touch with him anymore. Probably thinks I'm a swat, but because I've got mental and no one really wants to chill out with you after you've been sectioned 10 times over the space of 10 years. But anyway, yeah, Leilani, it was this imaginary friend thing, and it was just a weird one because, you know, I didn't really like, my brother was very articulate from a young age, and he had a very good perceptive sense of kind of like identity, and I don't think he was delusional, right? And I don't know who Leilani was. It's probably on record. You can probably research it with Devon County Council, or with the social, you know, adult social care, child social care, whoever. Because he almost got referred as like for treatment or for, you know, prescription or whatever it was. It became like an issue that was like discussed with the authorities and the welfare team, that he was delusional, you know. But he was, I remember him just being fixated on it, you know. Anyway, this video is 50 minutes long, so thank you for watching. I'm not insinuating anything about, you know, anybody who is working in any profession or that I've ever met. I'm just airing my concerns about the disproportionate inequality between security monitoring and the online infrastructure for one crime versus another, when they both should be just as easy to combat and tackle. Let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Thank you.